I'm not usually a big fan of city building games. In middle school, I used to play a lot of SimCity 4 and when it was released, SimCity 5, but I outgrew those games pretty steadily as the years went by. I kind of realized there was only so much you could do in them. Build industry, make neighborhoods, and just turn a profit. So at some point, I just figured it was pretty boring. However, I will say that I'm also a sucker for aesthetics, and that alone will get me to purchase games I normally wouldn't. Blockhood was one of those purchases. Blockhood is sort of like a city builder game, but it's different in a number of ways. Firstly is the fact that you don't really build a city, you build a neighborhood. The game wants the player to build a self-sustaining neighborhood that builds upwards instead of outwards. In real life, this would be a way of avoiding urban sprawl. Secondly, Blockhood wants the player to build a natural environment for wildlife as well, which is something that, to my knowledge at least, is not present in any other city building games. The game is less meant to build an environment for humans and more an ecosystem in where humans and animals can coexist. As you can see from the gameplay footage though, you can easily negate all of that. You can focus on an environment for humans, like I do, or you can go in the opposite direction and just make a forest for animals. I don't like dealing with the environmental aspect too much just because I find it a bit tedious, and I want to make cool Blade Runner towers. Look, I bought this game to make aesthetically pleasing buildings, not a bunch of plants. Why the hell would I buy a game for that when I could just do that in real life? I'm helping! The gameplay is pretty simple. You click on these little modular buildings you see in this little menu to the bottom left, and you click the desired location to place them down. Every building has resources that are needed to build them, so you'll need to build those too. A small apartment, for an example, requires water, electricity, and a source of fresh air. So we'll need to build sources for those to continue. Every building has an output too. These outputs can be either beneficial or harmful. The small apartment gives labor and consumers, but also gray water, which is essentially wastewater that has to be managed. Every block has an input and output that makes every building in the neighborhood interact with each other. It's a very complex and well thought out system that not only makes resource management an important part of neighborhood building, but also makes the player think about how things are produced. In other city builders, one might place down a coffee shop, but Blockhood doesn't make it that simple. The neighborhood is self-sustaining, so the whole coffee making process needs to be built as well. This means you need to produce the coffee beans, and so you need a coffee bean farm. But to get a coffee bean farm, you need a source of fertilizer. Once you secure those, you start getting coffee cherry, but you need to dry those to produce coffee beans. So you produce a drying facility. But wait, you'll also need a hot water source in order to brew the coffee. So you need to build a source for hot water. You'll also need to make sure that you have enough labor and electricity to run the shop and enough consumers to buy the coffee. After that, then you can build your coffee shop. It should be obvious at this point that Blockhood is meant to support an environmental message. It's pretty damn blunt about it too. It takes problematic issues like waste management, gray water, and greenhouse gases into account, and that's all really cool. However, personally, I see a lack of consequence of non-environmentally friendly practices. The player always has the option to build unsafe, heavily polluting infrastructure, and all that happens is that the citizens will become less happy as these negative resources build up. In SimCity, the only consequence to pollution, to my recollection, is backlash from citizens. But at least there, protests can occur, which can escalate into riots, and in turn, damaging the infrastructure. Blockhood has none of that. You can have peaceful protesting, but like any other politician, you can just ignore it and continue building crappy, profitable, polluting infrastructure with no real consequence. I also have a problem with the story mode. The story mode is obnoxious and it takes the environmental element of the game and shoves it down the player's greasy fucking throat. This is meant to teach the player the basics of the game and about the supply chains, as well as create some commentary on industry and the effects it has on the environment. To be fair, it achieves its goal pretty well, but it's a painful piece of shit to play through, and I didn't even bother recording it because I couldn't bring myself to play through it a second time. Granted, it is important to play through it just because it acts as a tutorial, This doesn't make the whole ordeal less obnoxious, however. Overall, Block Hood is a very pretty, very in-depth, and very fantastically made city builder game. Unlike other city builders, this one is also concerned about the environment and informs the player on how to improve the ecology of human environments through new and innovative technology, as well as the retention of natural resources. However, I think there is a lack of incentive for players to go with more environmentally friendly options, and I have a major issue with how the game thinks the solution is achieved. It seems to give the message that all we need to make a more environmentally stable world is moral capitalism and infrastructure, when in real life, that doesn't happen. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox and say that Block Hood is a cool little video game that looks nice and explores resource chains pretty well. If this all looks nice to you, and you like supporting indie projects like this one, I'd recommend checking it out.